observing, clicks, that sort of observation. Well, I don't think that isn't genuine observation. It's observing people, but not in the way that actually matters.
Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, the creative effectiveness ad tech platform. And this is a weekly podcast about the future of data-driven marketing. Every week or so, I have the absolute pleasure and privilege to interview one of our industry's leaders. And this week is certainly no different. I'm on a call with Jeremy Nye, who is Senior Insight Manager Global at Just Eat Takeaway. Jeremy, for anyone who doesn't know who you are and what you do, can you give us a bit of background?
Yeah, hello, everybody. Hello, Tom. So I work at Just Eat Takeaway, and before that, I had a career in television. I started off at CBS in New York. So I did an MBA there, and then worked at MTV, Star TV, BBC for many years, ITV. I basically ran out of Channel 4 3 times. I think I reached the point where I worked at so many TV stations, there weren't any left, and managed to leap out of that into the world of food. But I'm from Sussex. I've got a couple of kids and a dog, and that's probably the most important things you need to know about me.
Brilliant. Good to know on the pet front, vital for this interview, Jeremy. So what advice would you give to someone trying to get into this industry, following your footsteps? Where would you think would be a good place to start for someone who's doing all the right things already? So working hard, building their reputation, their profile, and so on. What advice would you give to a student?
Well, when I interview people to join the team, I often ask them, apart from all the standard questions you have to get through, to talk about somebody they really like or something they've read recently that has inspired them. And often they don't really have a very good answer. And I think people should, the advice I would give is to read as widely as you can and to look for inspiration from things that fall outside your main area of work. So if you define yourself too narrowly as an expert in one particular area, I think you miss the chance to bring in wisdom from other areas. I worked at the Financial Times for a little while, and we were trying to work out what made the Financial Times better than the Wall Street Journal. And so I had a meeting with Gillian Tett, who was looking after American side of things at the time. And she said the difference was that the Wall Street Journal people are real specialists at what they do. They will have spent their entire time working on oil, for instance, or one other particular specialism. The people they hire at the Financial Times have come to perhaps studying energy or oil, but from somewhere else. So they could bring an understanding of oil by seeing how it related to other areas. And she called that smart. And I think you become smarter when you just have a breadth to your interests, and rather than narrowing yourself down into too tight a specialism. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, because I struggle with that actually, because I listen to books a lot when I run, and I'm always trying to decide, do I read outside of the category or outside of my specialism? And I have a specialism within Automated Creative, like sales and marketing is my function. Do I just niche down on that, or do I niche down on data-driven marketing, or do I just read about something completely different? I often find it difficult to know what to read to where to draw inspiration from, and I guess a mix is the best. But do you have any other advice to, maybe not a student, but do you have some advice to become a better data-driven marketer? Do you have something that you find yourself sharing most often with your teams?
Yeah, so I really love drama. My brother Simon writes TV shows and so on. And I don't know why, my mum had been an actress as a young woman. And so I have this, I love watching plays, and the quote I use most often at work to encourage people it comes from the world of drama, and how caring for people comes from understanding human motivations. So John York talks about, why do characters in soap operas say things like it's all about family when they're going to bump somebody off or do something they shouldn't? And they say something like that because it gives them, it animates them. You know what they're doing this for. The same thing applies to the guy in Breaking Bad. Walter White is protecting his family. So once you understand what the the motivation is of the character you're watching when you watch a drama, then they're your person. You will support them even if they're doing something bad, because you can relate to their motivation. And I think in the world of where I work at the moment in food, but before that in television, I think we often thought that the motivations of customers or viewers were different from their actual motivation. So at all times, it's important to look for that deeper understanding of why people do what they do. If you don't know that, then they're dead to you. You can't relate to them, and you need to care for these people. So that's and I think a lot of what we do where I work at the moment is about customer closeness and feeling something for your consumer, not just observing them. I think that's really important.
So moving on now to your shiny new object, which is massively related, which is talking to people, which isn't particularly shiny or new, but in the run-up to the recording, you felt that this was quite a new thing because people have stopped doing it. Can you tell us a bit more about why talking to people is your shiny new object and why you think we need to do more of it when it comes to data-driven marketing?
Well, I think this is a sort of post-COVID observation, but it's not just me. I mean, there's a whole subgenre of books about the way in which society is becoming more atomized and lonely. The Lonely Century by Norina Hertz is one example, but I've got, there's myriad books that talk about this phenomenon where our circles are getting narrower. And I think a lot of the research that we do is also very focused on individuals and talking to them as if they are individuals and not as people who sit within a community or a group of people. So I'm often asking when we commission projects, this not be about what individuals are doing, but about how they interact with other people. And I think that applies more widely to the way in which we operate. The challenge of getting out and talking to somebody directly, observing them, interacting with them, rather than simply looking at databases. I think as everything's become more technologically driven, that in-person interaction with people seems to have gone down, and it may be that's not a new thing. I mean, it's ethnographic research has been around for decades, but it's still something I think has been forgotten. And you do actually forget things. There's lots of examples of techniques that have fallen out of favor, and people have to recover them, and so they become new where they aren't really.
So how much of this do you think is due to the big tech players in the space, right? The Metas and the Googles of this world, so dominant, commanding such a big spend. That's not their gig, right? They're not there to go, you should definitely go out and talk to people and do so. You should look at your AdWords dashboard or whatever it is. Are we being bullied here? Are we being muscled out of doing the soft stuff, to your point around acting, to understanding what actually drives people? Or is it laziness? Why are we in this position where we've forgotten the core value of listening?
Well, I suspect that there's been a long-term trend towards use of databases. There's a suspicion actually of qualitative research. People are very rude about focus groups and believe that the say-do gap means that you can't believe anything people actually tell you, and that what matters is observation. Well, not of observation, observing, clicks and that sort of observation. Well, I don't think that is genuine. That isn't genuine observation. It's observing people, but not in the way that actually matters. So yes, I mean, you have to be suspicious of what people say. I mean, that's really important. Body language, tiny details of how people interact are truths about them that are important. But still, I think, I think there's a general push from people like Google and others towards measuring everything and not from the value of one-to-one interaction and getting out of the office and meeting people. And I think it is shiny. I mean, also in people's lives, people sit within particular bubbles, particular subgroups of people, and that's a bad idea, because it means you have a completely misconception about your customers. And the quote I gave earlier is part of this. If you don't really understand them, then you don't care for them, and if you don't care for them, you're nowhere. You've got to care for somebody or populations that exist on a spreadsheet, because that's not who they really are.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with MadFest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from MadFest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. So you've created quite a difficult situation for the insight professional from a marketing perspective, because on one hand, you've got a focus group and like say and do the gap you mentioned there. So you can get 20 people in a room and they can say stuff, but what will they actually do isn't the same. Then on the flip side of things, you've got your spreadsheet or your database and you've got clicks. And my favorite quote about data is the shadows of people. I still can't remember who said it, but it's like, yes, someone clicked on this ad and bought a thing or didn't buy a thing or registered or whatever it was, but you don't understand anything about their motivation, generally speaking. Not always the case, but most of the time, if you're just running a straight PPC campaign or something like that, you're not going to get much more than volume of clicks and what happened after that click. So you've got this kind of distrust between say and do, and then you've got this vagueness sometimes of ones and zeros data. So how do you bring those two things together?
Well, I think you can often use the singular examples to tell the story that you've got on the data. I mean, I'm trying to think of examples. I remember ages ago, I was working in India and we were struggling to understand why people wouldn't watch our TV output. And I worked for Star Plus or Star TV, and we knew that we had small audiences, and everybody that we met seemed to talk about the programs we watched. And then we sat in a focus group, and actually this is the most sort of old-fashioned projective technique, is to but sometimes it works. I'm not always using such old ideas, but anyway, so tell us what this TV channel would be like if it was an animal. And I remember them saying, we're expecting, this is a family entertainment channel, by the way. We're expecting people to say, oh, a cat or a dog, or whatever. And they said it's a tiger. And that, seeing the person say it in the way they said it, you suddenly thought, okay, our perception of this channel as a warm, friendly thing actually isn't true. People see the material that we're showing as being quite threatening. And that was a cultural difference that emerged from that focus group that you wouldn't have got from putting together a questionnaire, and it wasn't explained by the data we were getting. It was something that you heard when you asked the most traditional projective technique, and I think that sort of response is very powerful if you can get people to see that at the office. Then that really helps. And these days, you need to get video of things, because if you just have it as a quote on a deck, it doesn't work so much. So being able to observe people directly, and I would actually the power of the explosion of Zoom calls and other video conversations has rapidly expanded the amount of visibility that you can give to your consumers, customers. And that's that was relatively shiny and new. That started, I suppose, during COVID, the sudden expansion. It existed before, but now everybody feels comfortable talking on video, and so you're not reduced to talking to the people that feel most comfortable doing it.
Can you tell me a bit more about the star story? They said you were like a tiger, and then what happened? What did you do with that insight? How did it play out?
It told us that that what we had been scheduling was not something that would ever be viewed by a family sitting together. So in India, and this is going back a while, but this is 30 years ago, or not quite, but that sort of stretch of time. But we were sitting there in Hong Kong, or we in our sort of middle class sort of situation with 3 televisions, and you watch whatever you want to watch. In India at the time, people had multi-generation households with a grandmother who would be also watching the same program. And the idea that you would let them watch, that you'd want them to watch something that had fathers, like we should show The Simpsons, and Bart being rude to Homer was something that would upset a traditional Indian household and be sufficient to put people off even putting your channel on. And that was a sort of cultural insight that emerged after we probed about this tiger issue. We also ended up completely changing the language of the channel, because it was putting it in English had the same effect. And we would have not appreciated from the people that we talked to that being in English was a limitation. As soon as you start talking to people, you began to understand why, even if they spoke English, they weren't going to watch it if we're given the household structure. So that's quite a long answer, but it's often little small things that capture a situation that you've sort of known about, but not hasn't crystallized it before.
And then say you're doing your talking to people approach, and you said it's opened up a lot within the likes of Zoom and so on, so people who don't feel comfortable sat in the room could do it, and you can expose your questions to a larger group of people. So then once you've spoken to someone, how do you then bring that into the digital world of marketing, right? So how are you taking the soft stuff and, as you say, changes in body language, subtle shifts in tonality, the soft stuff that you're talking about? At some point, someone's got to do something in digital, right? Someone's got to film something, make something, build an audience. How do you tie it up with the realities of the platforms and how they deliver content today?
Well, it's about convincing colleagues that something is really important. I remember, years later, I was at the BBC and we were doing a project in Siberia and went to a focus group, and they talked about whether they thought the BBC was biased at the time. And afterwards, we picked a couple of the participants, and I went to one of their homes. And he was picked, almost at random, but he showed me on his computer the way in which the broadcaster was showing something different in Russian versus its international service. And he pointed this up as something that he had a real problem with. It felt that it wasn't honest. Nowadays, you would have taken what he was saying and videotaped it and shared that with people as a powerful example of how people aren't just consuming news, but actually challenging it and doing their own research to sort of verify things. And so I think it's not that you've found something that didn't exist before. It's about having something in a format that will convince people. So where I work now, we share clips every day of engagements we've had with consumers. We're trying to boost the amount of unfiltered time people spend with consumers. I had this ambition that colleagues across the business would spend 1% of their time in unfiltered time with consumers or other people that matter for our business. 1% of a week, of a 37.5-hour working week, is 22 minutes. Most people don't have anything get anywhere near that. And that's just 1% of your time. So a lot of it is pure exposure. It's trying to get people who spend their entire time staring at screens to get out or even if it's on a screen, to get beyond their databases and so on, and just to see people's faces and hear something different.
So you were going for the 1% mission where you are now. Like, how close have you got to that?
Nowhere near.
1% of 1%, or how's that work?
Well, I don't want to assume that other people aren't having conversation and getting out. I mean, I have been told off before for accusing people of being in a bubble. Well, we're not in a bubble. We meet lots of different people. Well, and I got this small thing. I'm sitting in I live in Judd Street, which is near King's Cross, in the centre of London, and I'd been here for a year. My partner and I moved here and I've been here a year before I realised that Judd Street sounds just like Just Eat, which is the company where I work. And ever since I've been on a mission to encourage the whole business to have a sort of Just Street campaign, and sort of getting off screens and getting into streets, and because that's the real world that our customers are in. That's where the food is that they have delivered, and so on. So that's become a sort of mantra, but nowhere near 1%. And I think people are sort of surprised that 1% is 22 minutes. It's 22 and a half minutes. So in 2022, I was saying spend 22 minutes a week. And then I upgraded that as it was 22 and a half minutes. So 1% is 23 minutes. And anyways, it's less than 1% now would be represented by the year that we're in, 2024. But I'm rambling, but you get the idea. No, we got to boost it far more than we have at the moment. It's a fraction of that.
Jeremy, I love that you market your own insight initiatives inside a marketing team, just straight, and moving from minutes to percentage. I think that is. It's hilarious. Unfortunately, we're at the end now. I have so many more questions to ask you, maybe another time. But if someone wants to get in touch with you about talking to people or anything else that we've talked about, how would you like them to do that? And where would you like them to do that? And what makes a message that you will actually reply to?
You can email me. That's probably the easiest route. I'm occasionally on Twitter, but I'd rather not people didn't access me that way. So jeremy.nye@justeattakeaway.com.
Brilliant.
It's not the most snappy. We call ourselves Jet internally, but I think we probably don't own the rights to use that for our email addresses. So jeremy.nye@justeattakeaway.com.
Jeremy, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you, Tom.
Hi. Just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the shiny new Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.